This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Roshan Senanayake.
What's up, listeners? Welcome to Inspiring Design Season 3. This is where the best of the best brands, experts, change makers, and thought leaders come together to share their valuable insights, experience, and knowledge. Our goal here is to be the missing link between education, design, and the industry. Today we have a very special guest, almost an education celebrity here in Australia, but also at a global level, Yasodai Selvakumaran. We're going to be discussing all things education, so let's get straight into it. To give you a little bit of background on Yasodai, she is the teacher ambassador for New South Wales Department of Education and relieving head teacher, professional practice and humanities teacher at Rooty Hill High School in Sydney West. She leads teacher inductions and professional learning across career levels with expertise that include subject pedagogies, mentoring, and class observations. But here's what actually makes her extraordinary. In 2019, she was a top 10 finalist for the Varkey Foundation's $1 million Global Teacher Prize. She was recently awarded an honorary fellowship from Western Sydney University for a sustained and significant contribution to education in Western Sydney. So we're lucky to have her here, and Yasodai, welcome to Inspiring Design.
Thank you so much, Roshan, for having me on here.
Can we start off with your story? What's your background? What's your history?
Sure. So I actually came as a baby to Australia with my parents when they migrated from Sri Lanka. I was 10 months old, that was in the late 80s, and they initially came to Sydney, and it was the late 80s, it was a recession time in Australia. My dad was looking for work where he could get it, and he was offered a job as an engineer with the New South Wales government in a small rural town called Hay. Most people in Australia, even New South Wales, haven't heard of it. It's a very, very small town, about 12-hour drive from Sydney.
Oh, wow.
People stop there because it's often like a halfway point between here and Adelaide if you're driving. And it's a sheep and farming community, and so that's where we moved, and I lived until I was 10 years old. And so my little brother and sister were born there. My dad also brought over my grandmother, his mother, and two of my cousins to live with us in Hay. So they came over when they were mid-high school and finished their schooling there and moved to Sydney. So from a very young age I had role models, that basically like my big brothers that did well when they actually hadn't really learnt English that well. They came over and repeated and showed me that with hard work you can achieve success. So from there, my parents actually moved to Bathurst, which is a regional town closer to Sydney, about 3-hour drive, and that's where I finished my schooling. And I actually had the experience in Bathurst of going to public and a private school for a couple of years as a scholarship student. And I actually changed back to public, and it was there that I really realised that it's about the quality of teachers that really makes a difference. And for me, I was very much inspired by my teachers at that school, which ultimately has led me into the career in public education that I have. Yeah,
and I think I'll completely agree with that statement. Whenever I'm working with my first years at uni, in week one we can tell which ones have been going through that really high quality education at a secondary level, whereas some people have had that misaligned one. So this is actually where I think what you said, the influence of that teacher makes a massive difference.
Yes, and I had great teachers at all the schools that I was at, but I did see from a young age that there's resource issues and there's great teaching, and I've worked, this is my 10th year now in public education.
Yeah, wow, there you go, awesome. And so let's get straight into the Global Teacher Prize. Can you tell us a little bit about what this award is, just to set some background?
Sure. So the Global Teacher Prize is, I guess, receives a lot of attention because of the $1 million prize attached to it. What the Varkey Foundation have done is, in 5 years that it's been running so far, have really created a network of ambassadors as well. The whole idea of recognising finalists is to show that teaching is a very collaborative profession, and by identifying change makers in respective contexts, they've got an opportunity to bring them together and to amplify what they do. So the top 50 are announced, and their stories are shared.
Yeah.
As a top 10 finalist, which I was very fortunate to be chosen as, we're very much brought together to really highlight those stories, and we had an amazing opportunity to be in Dubai last year. The award has been held in Dubai for the last 5 years, around a forum called the Global Education Skills Forum, of which the Global Teacher Prize has been the finale. But I do understand the Varkey Foundation are doing things a little bit differently this year, and so some more information will be coming out about that too. But the great thing about it really is the opportunity to connect with other finalists, and that $1 million prize really gets everybody talking. It's been able to put a spotlight on education and the work that teachers do. And the Varkey Foundation's motto is very much teachers matter. And we need to have teachers at the heart of really looking at how we can make learning the best that it can be. And for whatever reason, in many, many countries, teachers are left out of that conversation. And we need to make sure that we've got the people who've got the expertise working at the forefront with policymakers, with researchers, with everybody that's invested in education to be able to really make it what we can.
Yeah, absolutely. This is music to my ears. So I'm loving everything that you're putting down, actually. And so it's almost like the Nobel Prize for teachers.
It has been called that, yes, because there's a lot of teaching awards, but the profile that this one has had, it is a very vigorous process to apply. And if there's any teachers out there or people that know teachers, I'd encourage you to just keep an eye out on the Varkey Foundation social media and website when nominations open, just to take the time to nominate someone, because I probably wouldn't have applied if someone didn't encourage me to. In fact, I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
It was the thought that someone had taken the time to recognise and just got, you get an email saying this person's nominated you, or they can remain anonymous. You can just apply yourself.
Was it your school that helped you nominate?
It was like my school and the fellowship that I was a part of in 2018 through the CommBank Teaching Awards and Schools Plus.
Cool. And
so through that network, that really introduced me to some international experiences in education. And part of that fellowship was an opportunity to travel to Singapore for a study tour with the 11 other fellows of that program. And that fellowship now is in its 4th year. And in March, the 4th cohort of 12 educators will be announced too.
Awesome.
So they've actually been considered as a national teaching prize in terms of the Global Teacher Prize as well. You don't have to go through that program at all, but it is the way that, for me, I think helps me really have some experiences that let me work a little bit more internationally and to put myself forward.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool, and obviously that would have given you a very global understanding of what education is just going through that fellowship. It
did. What it taught me was that teachers, doesn't matter what level of your career you're at, you can have a difference beyond your own classroom at an international level, really.
Yeah.
And to be influenced by international ideas. And that's not a new thing. The school that I work at is very much involved and in a lot of things when it comes to being aware of research and practice and getting ideas from state level, we host a lot of school visits, for example. We have people go out and be asked to present on the professional learning that we do at our own school in rural areas and interstate, and that really developed my own leadership and my interest and expertise as someone working in teacher professional learning, as well as not just being in my own classes.
Yeah.
But the prize is not necessarily about one person's achievement, because, to be honest, you wouldn't get to that level if it wasn't for all of the work that you have done in teams and to have the support of those people in applying as well. So in the application process, when we applied, I think it does change year to year, but generally the criteria is looking for your innovation in your own classroom and your success with students, how you have promoted the profession and been a great advocate, and how the work that you are doing, can really go beyond your own classes as well.
Yeah, cool. Now, before I get into the details of that and how we break down what's happening in your classrooms, I have to ask this question. I know that Hugh Jackman announced that.
He did,
yes.
yes.
How did that feel? Did you know about that?
No, we did know that every year, and this is all on YouTube and things if you're interested, the Varkey Foundation, they've made a big deal of this by getting some very key celebrities involved.
Yeah.
And one of those has been having a unique way of actually announcing the top 10. So, 1 year it was sort of done with school children spelling out a name with like aerial footage. That was actually how the winner was announced in Dubai. But with the top 10, there's been some very high profile celebrities being called in to announce that. But we did hear that our experience in Dubai was very, very different to previous years. You know, they'd had various celebrities. Like one year there was some of the members of Suits, cast were there on the red carpet. But for us, Hugh Jackman was very much the person, the host, the performer.
So he was there in Dubai?
He was there in Dubai,
Cool.
And we kind of got wind that he may be involved when we saw a picture of him in the Dubai desert earlier in the week. And so we thought, maybe he's here. But it was meant to be a surprise. And it was only on the Saturday. The awards night was on a Sunday. They actually brought together a concert, and they called it The Assembly, in line with education themes. And Rita Ora, Liam Payne were some of the performers there.
Awesome.
And so we were backstage. They actually, it was like being a celebrity for 4 days when we were there. The top 10 were brought out on stage, at a music concert, and people were cheering for teachers.
Awesome.
And it was just this incredible experience. And the finalists were there as well from the top 50, and we also had previous top 50 there to be our mentors. So it was a very much, a very collaborative experience in those 2 days. But that was an unreal,
absolutely, I can imagine.
Once in a lifetime opportunity. But Hugh Jackman surprised us backstage.
Right, so you did get to meet him.
Yeah, so on that Saturday we were super excited, and we were taking selfies and things backstage.
Yeah.
It was actually a little bit of a contrast to then Sunday night when we knew he was hosting the awards, and we were in the green room, but it was we were all quite nervous because we all knew that someone's life was going to dramatically change at that announcement.
Absolutely.
And it was
So he was the one who actually announced the final person?
He did. Yes, right. So he was there as well. So,
wow.
Yeah,
What's he like?
Amazing opportunity. He is just a fantastic human, everybody says that he's always happy-go-lucky and really lovely, and it was just amazing. He calmed us all before we went out. We were a little bit nervous backstage, and each of us got to really have a moment with Hugh, and I think just kind of came back and it's we should all be more like Hugh Jackman.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, calm, oozes just this absolute joy in everything and managing so much. I was just in awe of him hosting and performing, and the way that he was with his crew and with us was just phenomenal.
There you go. Shout out to Hugh Jackman.
Shout out
I'm
to
hoping
Hugh. Thank you for making that just such a special part
absolutely.
of the prize.
And I'm hoping he's going to be listening to this, and who knows, you might be a future guest of Inspiring Design.
I actually took my mum to his show when he came to Sydney, and we were pretty close up, but it was dark, and my mum was like, maybe he'll recognise you. I'm like, no, we should have got the other tickets. We should have got the tickets to meet him backstage.
I'm obviously a massive fan of Wolverine, and that's where my love for him grew. So it's pretty cool. When I saw that video of him announcing your names, I think that's when the ball dropped for me. So that's amazing. So, but let's get into the actual details of what your teaching practices are all about. So, in your definition, what is an effective teaching practice?
So, effective teaching is something that in every single lesson, we've got to really think about what is it that we want our students to achieve? How do we know when we've gotten there? And what impact and shifts in our learning do we really want to look at? So that's really an idea that I've learned from the school that I work in and from my principal. And really we need to constantly be thinking, how are we going to know if students have gotten there? And the design of that learning, depending on the focus and the context of the school, and this could be the same for professional learning or whatever other context in learning it is to really think about where your students are at or where your teachers are at in the teacher professional learning work that I do. And that really very much has to guide what it is that you're trying to achieve. So for example, critical and creative thinking has been a core focus of what we've been doing to drive other capabilities in the Australian curriculum. And that's taken an approach where as a teacher you design lessons and experiment in your own classes, but you also need to then be able to work with your teams, really have an understanding of what it is that you're looking for, and not to stifle creativity by any means, but to have a common language around what you're doing, because that's the way that we're going to have success and to be able to shift students across the school. And so that really has come from any approach that we have done at the school I work at, and it very much comes down to what is it that we want to our students to be able to do? Can we do that ourselves, and asking that? And it's a constant journey of constantly learning and unlearning as educators, because the things that we need our students to do is always changing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we need to be able to look at ways, UNESCO have this idea of, learning how to know, do, and be. And that's come up in other researchers, and one person that we've been looking at is an American called Professor Lee Schulman, who talks about educating for the professions in a tertiary context. So he's written papers, especially in terms of professional preparation in law and like nursing, and really looking at, what are those ways of knowing, doing, and being, or the moral, intellectual, and technical components of education.
Yeah.
How can we have equal measure on those components? And the fact that knowledge in a field changes. So what counts as knowledge in a field is going to be changing, and we need to be able to keep up with that, and to be able to work backwards in a secondary context, really, in all education, but to really look at what do we want our students to be when they leave us, in terms of preparation for work, apprenticeships, could be further study, but looking at those moral components is just as crucial. And I think assessment sometimes, especially some large-scale summative assessments and standardized testing, there's a lot of debate around how effective that is in doing that. And I think one of the tensions in education is being able to prepare our students, for these potential measures that might dictate where they go next in their life or set up their future pathways, but also really looking at the heart of what we want them to do in our disciplines and what we want them to leave with, because ultimately it's about educating the person in
absolutely.
all components.
Yeah. And if you had to now, you already mentioned a couple of skill sets like creative thinking and so on. What are the foundational skills, if you had to almost list it out, for the 21st century future of education? Well, not so future, current.
Yes.
What would you say are the foundational skills?
Well, it's interesting that we're still using that term, 21st century.
We're already in it.
But yeah, it is very much aligned to capabilities and dispositions, or whatever they might be called.
Yeah.
But I think, what that looks like in different subjects and disciplines, it's generally, it's looking at things like synthesizing, analyzing, evaluating, reflecting. But it needs to be done in a specific context in order to be effective. And there's a lot of debate around this, but that's the view that I align myself to as well. Because what critical and creative thinking looks like, for example, in my history class, is similar in some ways, but different to what it looks like in society and culture, which is an introduction to sociology and anthropology at university. And again, different to what that might look like in geography, because what synthesis looks like is different. In history, for example, synthesis is integrating sources, looking at bias, looking at issues of whether the historical interpretations have changed over time, and the idea of historiography. In my society and culture class, synthesis includes integrating primary and secondary research that students have done, actually conducting their own qualitative and quantitative research and data, and bringing all of that together is a very different skill in synthesis. Not to say that one is necessarily harder than the other, but it requires specific ways of thinking about those disciplines and learning, and how writing, the way we communicate in various things, if we're showing our expertise, look different. And I know there's been this whole arguments for generalist education and people saying that specialization is not going to be as important, but I absolutely think that it does matter. It really does matter in the way that we introduce students to these ideas, because ultimately then they're also thinking of what they're good at and what they want to be. And those skills are transferable. So yes, there are generic ways of designing learning, but there's also very specific disciplinary ways of knowing, doing, and being that we need to be able to cultivate. And be able to show the students and adults, whatever learning context it is, the connections where they can take those transferable skills.
Now you mentioned about giving them the adaptability, and so do you actually spend time individually with the kids to understand their specific requirements, their background, their context? Do you actually spend time with them individually, or
yes,
you do?
So as a teacher, I guess one of the challenges is you have multiple people, multiple students in your classes. It can be up to 30, 25. Some of your senior classes might be smaller. Just depends on what you have. But as a class, especially in the subjects that I teach, really trying to put forward to students that there is not one right answer when we're looking at issues of perspective.
Yeah.
It actually takes time. So some students will be like, no, but what's the right answer? And so even just to give you an example from my Year 9 history class yesterday, we were looking at the impacts of the Industrial Revolution and how technology has changed over time. So I asked, as a reflection, what technology has changed in your lifetime, and so how have mobile phones changed, how has the way that you watch TV changed, and they had some guiding questions. And a couple of students were like, but what's the answer? And I said, we've got some answers that we can discuss, but what the question's got, it's about you.
They
so
just wanted the answer straight from you. Yeah.
And these are students that I haven't taught before, and as a teacher, part of that is it's if you don't have the connection and the relationship, you've got to spend time, building upon that. And as you find out more about the students, you can integrate that and give them more guiding questions as well.
Yeah.
But that's that idea of being right or being perfect about something. I think is something that we have to break, and that's something that I'm guilty of as well.
Yeah.
I absolutely can be trapped by certain perfectionist tendencies, in doing anything. And as a teacher, I've had to learn that I've had to model that I don't always necessarily know something, or I'm not necessarily good at writing a particular brief for something, or working on even when I first started doing media interviews, I got quite nervous, for example, and I shared that with my students, and I said, it's about tolerating uncertainty. It's about being able to look at these traits. And at our school, we've been informed by the work of Dr. Valukas and Ellen Spencer at the University of Winchester, and really looking at their model of creativity, which is based around, there's 5 key traits. Being inquisitive is one, being imaginative, being collaborative, being persistent, and being disciplined. So they've got it as a wheel, and our school has adopted that wheel, and then there's sub-traits that go with those. And we've actually aligned them to specific teaching strategies to be able to cultivate that. So it's a framework that we talk about. We have a common language, but teachers have absolute agency in the way that they integrate that into their lessons. But by having that language and being able to talk to students, we had to get really comfortable with what that looked like for us. We spend a lot of time, and we do it even now, years since we first introduced this way of thinking, to reflect on our own strengths and tolerating uncertainty. When I remember looking at that wheel, that was one of the sub-dispositions. I was like, that's not something I'm good at. I can tell you absolutely with this experience of the Global Teacher Prize and all of the skills that I've learnt with doing media and doing various things and being absolutely put into context where I didn't know what was going to happen. I now think that's one of my strengths, and I say that to my students. And especially with seniors, they're often like, all of these unknowns. They don't know what they want to do when they leave school. They're not sure if they're going to get the right ATAR. They don't know if they'll get into different pathways. And I think, that language is just as useful in the extracurricular and development of students and the mentoring of students that isn't necessarily linked to your subject area as it is with your actual subjects as well.
Yeah, and I think it's triggering me into this conversation I had back in season 2 with a year 11 student from Hillcrest Christian, and they have this pedagogy in their school called Flearning, which is not a word I've heard outside of their school context, and which is embracing failing forward or failure learning, which is that uncertainty. And it's okay not to know the answer. It's okay to mess up. But it's an iterative process. You evolve, you change, you keep going. And how you adapt, how you put yourself through those changes, I think that's where the important mindset approach is. And it's almost like it's part of the growth mindset. And I love that. So this is where I think what you're saying is also fitting in. And the other thing I wanted to ask was, you mentioned guiding questions. So rather than giving them the answer. So this is very much the same practice that I follow at a tertiary level, where they'll come to me with a question like, how do you do this on Revit in an architectural context? Or what's the section on the building code that I need to go look this up? I'm like, well, we can look at it together. Or I actually don't know. How about we find the answer together? So how do you see this difference between the old school way of teaching, if for the lack of a better term, and facilitation? What do you think is required for the future of education?
Well, I actually think there's facilitation, and there still is a need for explicit approaches. And I think it's important to say that we can't just put people like into these sort of big picture questions without actually modeling how we would answer that ourselves.
Yep.
And so, you know, as a teacher, it might be having some questions and then also having like a model response ready to use with the students that just need to see an example and to be able to like meet students where they are, especially if they're students with literacy is a focus, and showing them what the kind of vocabulary should be to actually integrate into their responses as well. So everything is like an opportunity to teach multiple skills. And so there's very much a place for explicit teaching and modelling, but that doesn't necessarily take away from guiding thinking and questions, because it's a process. So even to be able to be successful with the class with using strategies like we use a lot of the Harvard visible thinking routines, and the first time you try one, it's a bit of a mess usually, because you have to set up a protocol around it. The students don't know that they've got this freedom. They might need to show them an example, like for like it could be the same topic or a different topic, and then they'll go, oh yeah, I get it, I can do it, and then you might try the same routine in a different way, and then they know how to do it. So it's like the routines as a teacher are just as important to be able to transition effectively within your own lesson, and guide students to be able to do what like they can do, but also extend questions as well. And that's where I think lesson design is very, very important. So we talk a lot about what makes effective learning and like big picture learning. So as teachers, we'll have our programs that we work on, or units of work, but then every single teacher will they'll modify that work and adapt it to suit the needs of their class. And I work at a comprehensive high school, so we have a big range from like our students, from supported students to our extension classes. And so that very much that team program is a starting point. It's a base that we all work on, but how we translate that into our own lessons is going to be different and guided by the students who are in front of us.
Now this is a question that kept popping up in my head while you were speaking. These are terminologies that relate to design thinking. Do you call creative thinking design thinking, or is that a different terminology from your point of view?
Design thinking has come up a lot in professional learning, and we have used that term. There's a team at our school that's running our entrepreneurial learning program, for example, and students actually explicitly use the design thinking process to ideate and come up with multiple options, and then choose what their focus is going to be. And we definitely have taken ideas from that in various approaches. But what is unique at our school, I think, and it's probably the case for many schools, is we don't just subscribe to one pedagogy. So there's different faculties, incorporating project-based learning. There's other ones using inquiry-based. As a history teacher and society and culture teacher, at the moment, that's like a lot of the approaches that guide what goes on in our classes and in my own classroom. But really looking at where it fits for our particular disciplines. And so what we aim to do, and I guess my teaching reflects as well, is looking at innovative ways of embedding and cultivating capabilities and dispositions, but within a subject lens.
I think that's valuable advice. And this actually takes me to that next question, because we have teachers listening in and educators, different levels. Some are in that primary level, some are secondary and tertiary. Do you have any advice on how these skills can be cultivated? So the inquiry-based learning, the project-based learning, the facilitation, the guided techniques that you mentioned before. How can these teachers learn as they go and cultivate these skills as an educator?
I think it's really, really important that we need to stress that teachers have the time to be able to go out on professional learning and to collaborate, and then to really bring back that to their own context. And context is important. So what works in our school or for our students may not necessarily work for another. And in terms of looking for ideas, I'd absolutely recommend it at a classroom level, starting with something like the Harvard visible thinking routines. They're very, very practical. There's lots of resources online, and they just give you some very clear ideas on how you can make thinking more visible in your classroom. And that's something that you can just sort of, as a teacher, pick up and run with. Even as an educator at different levels, you can use them as well. There's protocols to use around that too, and we've used them in teacher professional learning. But to be able to embed that across a team of teachers or beyond, whatever we're doing with our students, we need to be practicing and modelling ourselves. So that's how we can equip us to really be able to model and be explicit in the way that we do things,
Yeah.
is we're going to be more comfortable if we can do it.
Absolutely. And are there any books that you can recommend, or articles, or podcasts, or anything that you like that you can?
There's so many. But I can recommend. There's a short case study on how Rooty Hill High School, where I work, has really started their journey and how they're on critical and creative thinking and capabilities. And it was published by the Australian Learning Lecture. So if you Google Australian Learning Lecture, Rooty Hill High School, the Building Critical Skills case study will come up. There'll be some footage in there from a couple of years ago with my Year 9 class that I'm in. With some colleagues as well, but it just shows basically how the biggest lesson that we have learned with this initiative and others that we have embedded in our school is whatever we want to cultivate in our students, we need to cultivate with our staff and our teams as well.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And if you had to follow any mentors in the education sector, do you have any recommendations?
Oh, mentors. Do you mean like personally or for people to follow?
It might be online, might be actually someone they could reach out to.
So for me, in my own school context, my mentors have absolutely been my principal and deputies and a lot of colleagues, and beyond the school too, been part of various networks. So I'm actually an executive on the Australian Curriculum Studies Association. They run a lot of professional learning for teachers that is really about looking at the heart of curriculum issues and what is current. And I think the biggest advice I can say for teachers is to get involved in associations, whether it's like a general one in terms of leadership or curriculum or your particular subject, and informal associations as well. So the second biggest driver, apart from my school and in terms of external networks, has been the Teach Meet network, which is like a traditional unconference in terms of how it started, and very organic. It's by teachers for teachers. They sort of pop up at the side of conferences as well. But the idea is anyone can organise one. You have a theme. It could be in a pub. It could be at a school. You could have it more formal. But they're short, snappy presentations. Some of them have been deeper, but it's just about building your networks. And Twitter's quite useful for that as well. There's also chats that happen on Twitter with various themes. Even if you can't join at the time, you can always catch up looking at relevant hashtags. And so there's just a wealth of things out there. And I think for me, being introduced to some ideas that I find interesting have actually come from international teachers just posting what they're doing. And it's one of my goals for 2020 to tweet more and share more as well.
Awesome. Well, there you go. And I think I always ask this from my speakers is, do you have any advice for students and grads listening in? Because given the different speakers that I've had on the show, there are a lot of student followings as well. So do you have any advice for them, whether they're in law, whether they're in business, whether they're whatever they're studying or their industry? Do you have any advice for them?
Absolutely. I think as educators, we see students leave us at the end of year 12. And one of the most rewarding things is actually seeing where they end up. And sometimes it can be totally different. And if you're just at the end of whatever discipline or degree you've decided to study or an apprenticeship, is to know that especially in the age that we're living in, you're not going to necessarily just have one career, and to be open to different contexts. So even if, like myself, I have worked at the same school for 10 years, but the experiences I've had and to do a lot of other things have come from being involved in external networks and change things around, see what actually is interesting you at a particular point in time, because then you're going to end up being really good at it. So start with your strengths. At the same time, if there's something that you want to overcome, and I'll use the example of media being quite scary for me at the start, work on it. That's just something that, there's things that will pop up, and you might have never imagined that was going to happen. I definitely didn't think I was going to be winning a teaching fellowship, and let alone what happened with the Global Teacher Prize. And some people will say, there's a time, and I've needed this advice, where you have to say no to things because you just literally can't do them all, and you'll make yourself unwell or something. You'll burn out. That has happened to me. But in other situations, and especially with what's happened to me in the last year, I've pretty much said yes to a lot of things, and then working out how I can do it.
Awesome.
So I guess it's you meet people. There's opportunities that come up. I've also absolutely got the advice from mentors and things as well, but really looking at what I can do outside and to be able to advocate, but also bring that back, and how does that benefit my students? And sharing this journey has definitely been really, really positive, especially for my seniors. They find it really interesting. So I'll have year 12 when I get back to school this afternoon. I'm speaking to you, and they'll be like, "What did you do today?" Because they know that my week has very different.
Very different,
Yeah,
yeah.
and they find it fascinating,
Yeah.
which is odd. Even in the holidays, I was using the last of my fellowship in Marrakesh at the International School Effectiveness and Improvement,
Mm-hmm.
and I had got messages from my Year 12 saying, could they look at the presentations online?
Awesome.
So I was like, yeah, okay. I just didn't expect them to be so invested and interested. But it's I think it's just amazing to see the networks you can have, and don't confine yourself to just working in your field, because there's so many connections, there's so many stakeholders in like every industry. Education is definitely one that benefits from partnerships with business and other people and tertiary sector, and being able to really look at how we can work together to create meaningful opportunities that help us all grow. So things I go to with my students, I learn as well when it's an extracurricular opportunity. And I think it's just amazing to see. And lastly, apply for professional opportunities and look out if you can encourage others to do so as well.
Yeah, I think that's valuable advice, and I think your Year 12s are very lucky to have you. And while you were speaking, what went through my head was, who was that person when I went through high school? And I feel like I need to mention Phil Reed's name. Mm-hmm. He's awesome. He's
one of your teachers?
He was my favorite teacher, I think. He was my guiding, I think. I look at him as a mentor rather than the subject teacher. He was a manual arts teacher at the time, and oh boy, did we have some interesting cricket conversations. And it was during the time when Sri Lanka lost the World Cup final to the Aussies. That was not fun, but I still love him to death. And I think his guidance on how my studies got shaped, I think molded my mindset, even though I didn't know it was happening at the time. So I think I'm eternally grateful for him.
Absolutely. And I think I've been really fortunate as a teacher to have those sort of mentoring, student-teacher relationships with students I haven't even taught in class through extracurricular. And sometimes that's been one of the most rewarding parts of the job as well, is just to be able to lead a particular program and learn from that. And then one of the most rewarding things, I guess now more in leadership, is to see things that you have started be run by somebody else, and to be able to mentor others to do things that you've done, and be able
pave the path.
Just to be able to go, oh, that's something that I found really, really hard, and now I'm helping somebody else do it, or I'm mentoring them on how to do it. And so we're always learning in whatever we do.
I think there was an awesome Denzel Washington speech at one of the universities where he actually said the importance in education is actually learning and then reaching back and then pulling someone forward with you. So it's exactly that. Absolutely. And that actually embeds your skills and learning more by doing that. So it's a good karma project that just keeps going forward. I love that.
It's addictive. That's why, people in education we work hard. A lot of people work hard in really a lot of industries, but I think it's often why people can burn out, and you've got to be careful with managing well-being, because it's very easy to by nature you put other people ahead of yourself. And it's always need to have those well-being reminders as well.
There you go, guys. That was valuable insights, and Yasodai, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Guys, that's it for today, and it has been one of the most inspiring conversations and a lot of takeaways from even myself personally, and I have no doubt that most of you guys will have a lot of takeaways from today, whether you are an educator or even a student or even a professional listening in. So if you haven't been inspired already, jump on to roshansenanayaka.com/podcast and check out the show notes from today's episode, and click on the direct links to check out the amazing work that Yasodai is doing in education. Feel free to also reach out to her on Twitter at Yasodai Selva and her LinkedIn account, and make sure you deep dive into this amazing lady's work. So lastly, before I leave, click subscribe and feel free to share your thoughts and feedback about the topic and the discussion for today's episode. So till next time.